And now, here is your host, Dawn Lester.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Dawn of Discernment. I hope you all enjoyed your holiday season, whatever you did, had some rest time, copied nature, and slowed things down a little bit. So now we're into a new season, and I'm absolutely thrilled and excited to have a conversation today with my friend Chance Garton. Some of you may be familiar with him, some may not. So, Chance Garton is the host of InnerVerse, a podcast dedicated to prying open your third ear and showing you the reality of perpetual synchronicity. With nearly a decade of experience in podcasting, Chance has developed an effortless ability to maintain a positive vibe in conversational flow states. His consistent efforts at researching language, symbolism, and mythology fill his conversations with fresh insights, and his knowledge in a wide variety of subjects allows him to see connections that others miss. Chance is also a biofield tuner and seasoned energy worker and divination specialist, having helped hundreds of people around the world heal and align their mind and body. So, lots of fascinating topics to get into. So, welcome, Chance, and thank you so much for joining me on my podcast. It's great to see you here. Thank you.
I'm really excited. I've been looking forward to this since we put it on the calendar. You know, Don, you're one of those people that, even though we might not have had a ton of one-on-one interactions, I just feel like a kinship and closeness with you and your energy. So I know that we're going to have a really good time on this podcast today. So thanks a
Hey.
lot.
Oh, thank you. That's lovely. Thank you very much. Yeah. So, and I know from the podcast episodes I've listened to of yours, we do have a great deal in common. And all of those topics that sort of mentioned in your bio is just, it's like, oh, this is so exciting. So where should we start? Let's start. You're the host of InnerVerse podcast. That's not a single podcast. There are a few parts to it, but let's start with that and kind of where you started, why you started a podcast, and what InnerVerse is about. Because it's an interesting name, InnerVerse. So there must have been a purpose for that. So yeah, what was your journey to setting that all up?
So it started with me having the realization that I come alive most, maybe more than any other part of life, when I'm having a deep conversation about the philosophy of life, the why questions. I'm one of those kids when I was little that I could never get to the bottom of the why. And typically the adults in the room would just, put the final word out there because. And I just couldn't, man, there was nothing that irked me more as a little kid than for the line of inquiry to be ended with because, just because I said so, or just because that's the way it is. So I've always been a curious person. And in my early 20s, getting around transformational arts festivals and admittedly dipping my toe into some psychedelic experiences as well helped me start to really broaden my view and perspective of reality beyond just the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant upbringing and the extreme confines of that, which, I'm looking around at our country right now over in the States, and the WASP walls are closing in really fast, and everyone's cheering it on. And I'm like, whoa, we need to talk about this because the pendulum swings back and forth between the traditional and the progressive society, and that is a very dangerous back and forth to be stuck on. And that's something that's been a particular interest to me in the last couple of months. Any day now, I've got an episode coming out that delves deeper into that with a great researcher named Jack Kelly. But anyway, why InnerVerse? At the time when I came up with the name, it just sounded cool. I was looking for the answers of how do these like creative types that I was idolizing at the time, how have they managed to make their personal soul's calling, the thing that they like to do, into livelihood and get outside of the 9 to 5 grind that everybody else was in. So I was looking for somebody to just tell me the answer to that. And I hope to share it along the way. Turns out nobody can actually tell you how to do that. There isn't one particular answer. But the simplest one that I eventually landed on when I got there myself is just it's a leap of faith. That it never stops being scary. There's never a sure footing whenever you're going your own way, blazing your own path into the unknown. And so there is required of you a great trust in life and in your mission and in your purpose and in the support from unseen forces along the way. So InnerVerse has been constantly evolving and changing over the years. I'm in the middle of another one of those transformative, especially transformative moments in the life of this podcast. As I am getting on to, this will be at the end of the year, the 10th year that I've been doing it, which I know it doesn't seem like that because a lot of my content from the first many years I have hidden from the internet because it's embarrassing. I was just kind of figuring out who I was and what my purpose was, right? Exploring a lot. So I'm kind of going through some format experimentation at the moment, hoping to, last year I really focused on quality over quantity and I made a lot less content because of that. And I brought some very interesting creative stuff to the show in the fewer episodes that I made, especially with making music and visually metaphorical videos to go with the songs that were inspired by the episode conversations I was having. Those are really fun, but extremely time consuming and kind of, jammed up the process of actually connecting with my audience. And I've realized in the last couple months that that's just not going to work for me because the point of this is to connect with people and bring inspiration to people. And so I need to dial down the perfectionism streak that got a little out of hand and strike more of a middle ground between quality and quantity where I'm not just cranking stuff out just to crank stuff out. Sure, not go completely into the quantitative, but also ease up a little bit on, because the problem with the creative stuff I was doing, like making music videos for the show, for example, is it just became an escalation thing where every time I made one, it was like I was getting better at it and my vision for it was getting more intense and, finding myself spending more and more time getting lost in that sauce. And, I'm not saying I'll never make music and music videos again for content because it is pretty cool and pretty fun. And I think I was onto something with that, but it's expensive. It's expensive in terms of the time and the tools that are required to do that. So I'm going to be reining that in this year and coming back toward a little bit more like I was doing in the years before I became a father. Part of what inspired me to take the process I took last year was just I could not be in the office in the studio as much because I've got a little kid now. And that's going to continue to be the case, but maybe not as extremely the case now that she's getting a little bigger. So that's a little bit about where I'm at. My mission is the same as it's always been, which is to inspire people to find the courage to seek the truth within themselves that allows them to live the life that they know deeply that they're meant to live, or help them see the tools that break them out of the patterns of thought that were keeping them restricted from that freedom. It's still a process that I'm engaged in. It's not something that I've perfected. I don't think anybody has perfected. I think there's not like an end point to that process. It's a continual process. So as I continue on that journey, I'm hoping to, inspire people to take the steps or keep taking the steps, whatever it may be, as we go forward into 2026. Who would have ever thought we'd be at such a big number? It's kind of weird.
Yes, exactly. I mean, we'll get more into the content of your podcast because so you've got is it 3 now different styles? But it's an important point you talking about the pendulum, where the pendulum swings, and that happens so often that it's all something, and then the pendulum it just goes all the other way instead of coming back to not like a boring middle ground, but a somewhat more or less extreme, but also more appropriate, more natural, because extremes tend to take people off in directions that are just not helpful and not necessarily aligned with how things are. So, I mean, a lot of your work, I know, is helping people. It's helping, again, like with my podcast, label, name, discern is about discernment and helping people start to discern what they're being told and discern what's in what they're being told, why they're being told things, and to start seeing why things aren't the way we're told. So I think that's a lot of what your content is. I mean, one of your podcasts is with Dylan Secoccio, which, you dive into comparative mythology and religion. So I mean,
If
I
you don't
suppose we
mind,
could talk.
Don,
Yeah,
we could talk about that, and maybe we'll get into that. But
yeah, sure,
what you're saying is inspiring some stuff that I think is worth commenting on. So
sure.
when I look at the whole of the stuff that I do, whether it's biofield tuning or the podcast content, one word that always just comes back into mind is balance, right? I mean, you're talking about the pendulum swing. I would like to discuss that at the moment because there are some troubling signs of the momentum being gained in the other direction from the, commie leftist, whatever you want to call it, gay world order is now going into a different direction, right? So balance is what nature does. Nature always, like, look at any ecosystem, whatever is out of balance in that ecosystem will correct itself. And every organism has the innate instinct to be able to do this and fit into their niche in their ecosystem in a way that is healthy and fits with everything else. Now, like, the science might tell you that's not true. They'll be like invasive species this or whatever. But in the long run, and usually not that long a run, even the so-called invasive, like, how can you be invasive on the realm that you're native to? Whether or not you're on the right continent that you came from. The kudzu around here is an example. It is found these vines that just kind of take over trees and grow all over everything. We were warned in my youth and before that it was going to destroy the environment. And I'm here like 30 years later, and this stuff is just this beautiful wall of vines, and the rest of life is continuing. It's not actually harming anything. It's found its place in the environment. And humans, what makes us different is that we have the free will capacity, right? We have the ability to choose balance or not. And when we talk about biofield tuning, right? Energy work, the entire purpose of that is not like I'm shooting magical sound vibrations at you and it's fixing you. Actually, what we're doing is we're balancing energy that is stuck either to the left or to the right or forward or back and not circulating through the middle of your system as it should through that toroidal field. And it's our thinking and our belief system that keeps those things out of whack, right? Keeps those things off balance and don't allow things to circulate. And so in much the same way, human belief systems in the aggregate are what keep things out of balance. And when we talk about, like, well, what's the difference between balance and out of balance in the big picture? Boil it down. And it really just comes down to the generative principle of creation, of reality. The generative principle is the ultimate mystery of all mysteries. It's the most important aspect of ancient mystery traditions and the wisdom traditions of, that have become religions. And unfortunately, that generative power or that generative mystery has been completely forgotten by the modern religions, which is why, as the pendulum is swinging the other direction from the extreme left now towards the extreme right, we're in just as bad a situation, or we will be. It feels, things kind of have felt all right as the pendulum is swinging through the middle, right? It's like, you can almost like breathe a sigh of relief. But let me give an example. I just saw an article, and feel free to interject or, ask for clarification at any point, because I'll just kind of go sometimes. But I just saw
know it's fine. No, I just yes, I allow you to flow. If there's a particular question, I will. But carry on.
Okay.
So yeah.
So I just saw this article randomly, things pop up when you open your web browser, and there's a university called Texas A&M that has, the article was like, they were very upset. It was obviously like a lefty news outlet, but this university has banned the reading and study of Plato, like the philosopher, the granddaddy of all philosophers, Plato, banned. And so I see this headline and I'm like, clickbait, I gotta read this. It's because I'm particularly have been kind of on a Plato kick for a couple months, and I dive into the article, and apparently this university has been using some AI to scan all of the curriculum and all the books and things that are part of the curriculum to discover any references to anything that is aberrant in terms of sexuality or gender, right? So Plato, there's a particular myth that is shared in one of Plato's stories. I think it's the Symposium, where it's talking about the origin of humanity and how Zeus originally created humans as androgynes, as in they were male and female in one body, and then he split them to cause them to suffer and made them into men and women separate. And so this AI decided, well, we can't have anything androgynous. There's only two genders, not three genders. So all Plato is banned from this university because of that reference, according to this article. I mean, I didn't like follow up and make sure this was true, right? But it felt true. It felt like the way things are going right now, where the book burning from the left, banning anything that is not inclusive or not diverse enough, or, has too much positive things to say about white people or men. Now we're getting the other direction coming on strong, where we are going to, I hate to say it because, this is what the left says, but this is basically like what the mythology of the Nazis was. Like, this does not fit into the Reich. The Fuhrer does not approve. We're burning these books. It's crazy. There's so much more to Plato that is beneath the surface of the mythology. It was always esoteric. It was never meant to be what he's saying is literally true, right? And I would actually
that's true. Yeah, that's true in so many cases, and that's such a great point of the there are only two genders, and at the same time each of us is a blend of the masculine and feminine. So we each have our kind of, if you like, masculine and feminine attributes. So to some extent, that's not wrong, although we're not androgynous. Oh, this is the problem, as you say, with the swing from one.
All of Plato because...
Yes, well, it's like either, there's only that or there's too many, but you go, actually, no. And this is why we're always given this choice of, the one or the two, but, it's false dichotomy. You just go, no, because there are other options. And generally there's at least one other option. In this case, it's, well, yes, because we're a balance, again, like you're saying, a harmony of masculine, feminine. So, within Biofield Tuning, I know Eileen as well, she talks about coherence. So it's, it's the coherence, it's the harmony, it's the balance, not the extreme. So, yeah, no, it's just... I didn't want to sort of interrupt, but that's such an important point. Just going, and as you say, at that point we were starting to think, there's something sensible, but as you say, that's only a transit into what is starting to look ridiculous. This is the important point also when you're saying that things are taken literally, because that's a lot of your work, and once you start looking beneath the surface, you see that's where there's so much richness. There's so much more for us to ascertain through not taking these things literally, but to realize there's so much more depth.
So much more depth. And this, okay, so if we want to look at things through the yin and the yang and continue this analysis along these lines, we would consider maybe the right in this case to be the yang, or a masculine type of society. You could decide, you could kind of characterize people that are extreme right as people who want the government to be their dad. They want the government to protect them, but leave them alone and give them freedom, like a dad would do. Dad kind of is hands off, but he makes sure that you're safe and supported and that nobody messes with you. But otherwise, dad tends to give you more freedoms than mom might give you. Dad might look the other way when you do something that mom would say no to, right? In the left, they want the government to be their mommy. They want government to nurture them, give them everything, make sure things are fair. Like dads do not usually try to make sure that all the children are treated perfectly, equally, or fair, or included exactly the same. That's just not usually how. But women, they have more of a tendency to make sure that people in their social group are all included and all. That's just the nature of men and women in their tendencies, right? And so the left wants the government to be their mommy, and that's just kind of the analysis, right? So we've got the right, we've got the left. Now, in terms of in physical and spiritual senses, or mental, I should say, the yang is more of like the mental, spiritual energy, and the yin, the feminine, is more of the physical, embodied, peripheral energy. So it's like a point, yang, single point focus, yin, peripheral, circle, big, broad, right? So when we have extreme polarization towards the left, towards the feminine, what we get in any polarization towards one side or the other that becomes extreme destroys the generative power of that pole, right? So when the left goes full tilt, we're all the way there, we get transgenderism, homosexuality, abortion, all the things that entirely nullify the generative power of the physical form, the physical body. Less fertility, less babies being born, right? But when we go, and where the pendulum is going right now, you go towards the extreme right, we start to see the nullification of things mental and spiritual, right? People are flocking back into churches. They're going more back into fundamental Christianity. It's becoming the trendy, cool thing, because that's what the left doesn't want you to do. And now we're seeing the banning of higher thought, higher minded thinking, and esoteric thinking in universities, right? So understand this. This is the pendulum swing. Destroy fertility and physical bodies, left. Destroy spiritual thinking and higher minded thinking and the generative power of these non-physical aspects of self. Bing, bing. Does that make sense?
Yes, and at the same time, it's just so depressing, that it has to be one or the other. The idea that people believe that it could be one or the other. So yeah, but yes.
Well, the good news is I don't want to be doom and gloom. Is of course,
no,
and as
no.
right? None of this has to apply to you.
Exactly.
You can be above and beyond this because you are a world unto yourself, right? The beauty of life is that no matter what's happening in the collective, nothing is stopping you from having a good and fruitful life mentally and physically.
Totally. Yeah, because that's what talking about belief systems and I mean, we both come from the same understanding, the consciousness being primary. So that means our own belief systems affect our experiences. And so it's as much what we experience is as much, as no how much energy that we give to that external whatever is going on, knowing that there's something for us to understand from what's going on. And it's a question of how much we choose to engage with it, and then also how much we choose to recognize the messages for us, and how we choose to what we choose to do with it, and how we choose to evolve and grow, and know that we don't have to get pulled into it, because that's the obvious thing, is to get people pulled into these choices and extremes and keep everyone fighting, the old divide and conquer.
Well, so back to Plato, it was actually Plato that helped me see what was going on in society right now more clearly, which is cool. So going to a different story, not the symposium, but the Timaeus and the Critias, it turns out Plato has many works that actually address this very topic of the pendulum swing of polarization and how it destroys life, essentially. So Timaeus is famous for a particular part of the story where, in this dialogue, where the myth of Atlantis is told. So I was studying Timaeus to talk to a guest who has done a lot of work on trying to track down what may or may not be true about Atlantis. And in a nutshell, 99% of what people believe and say about Atlantis is completely insane and has no bearing in reality whatsoever, because it's the literal, it's a literalization of a allegorical story, right? In particular, just for the highlights on that, the funniest part is how people have for a long time looked for Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean, where in the story, the one story from antiquity that Atlantis comes from, only one story, it's Plato's Timaeus. Well, you could say it's slightly referenced in the Critias in an unfinished way. He never uses the word okeanos, which is ocean. Never once. He talks about an Atlantic pelagos. And a pelagos is a different type of water than an ocean. Pelagos is more like the Mediterranean Sea, or a mostly closed, like inland large waterway. So right out the gate, as soon as, of course, a lot of English translators translated pelagos as ocean, but that was an error. And then things have just snowballed from there, people taking it literally and never going back to the original ancient Greek of the text to see, oh, it never was an ocean, right? So just to be clear about that, because I know there's probably a lot of people in both of our audiences that enjoy some what you would call woo content, right? And I'm sorry, guys, but anyone that's telling you stuff about Atlanteans and ancient priests who rode telepathic dolphins and used crystals to transport themselves into interdimensional realities and I don't know what, name it. They're either making it up or they are repeating it from somebody else who made it up. But there's no, there's no, I don't care if you remote viewed it. Like, it doesn't exist. It does not exist. It's not a literal story. So anyway, I had to get that off my chest. Now, in the Atlantis story, what is interesting once you start trying to examine it esoterically is how there are two societies that are talked about in the 9,000 years ago, galaxy far, far away, a long time ago, that Plato talks about Atlantis coming from. He's saying it was 9,000 years anterior to his society, or prior to his society, and that the Athenians at that time had a civilization that was similar to, in the words of Timaeus, the type of society that you were telling us about yesterday, Socrates. So then if you read that, you need to ask yourself, well, what kind of society was Socrates telling them about yesterday or the other day? And the only time where society is talked about by Socrates in a Platonic dialogue is the Republic. So then you got to go read the Republic. The Republic is, ironically, if it's being banned now in a lot of universities that are swinging back towards the right, the Republic was one of the most studied works of literature of all time, especially in universities. Almost everybody that goes through a major university would have to at least know about it or read it. And this is one of the more misunderstood texts of all time too, because people think that Socrates is literally telling you how to make the perfect society, but it's super tyrannical and it's like super disjointed and anti, destroys the family quite severely. This society that he's talking about in the Republic is the ultimate manifestation, at least in the terms that he could come up with, Plato, in his era, of the extreme left society. And what characterizes that is progress for the sake of progress, and tradition be damned, basically. And if I wanted to put this into a different kind of characterization to help people understand, there's essentially two myths that exist in terms of how a society can have its foundational view about itself. There's, if we're talking about polarities, there's the belief that we have come from higher beings. We descended from gods, demigods, or just enlightened ancestors or superior ancestors. So that's the myth of descent. The right, or the traditional society, tends to believe in the myth of descent, right? And that's why it's important to honor the traditions that came before us and to keep those traditions alive, and to not just make changes and progress for the sake of change and progress, because that's dangerous to the traditional society, because we're going against our superior ancestors or the gods. Then there's the left, the progressive society. They believe in the myth of evolution or ascent, that we have come from lower beings, whether those were monkeys or, single-celled organisms or just cavemen. Whatever the case may be, our ancestors were dumber and worse in every way. And so it's up to us to improve upon things that came before us every step that we can, because we are the pinnacle of humans. So right away, you might see a problem with this, because obviously some of our ancestors were dumber than you, and some of your ancestors were smarter than you. It's just like, duh, right? Of course,
Actually,
because totally. But when you when you look at how the left and the right operate, they pretty much operate on the extremes of one of these sides or the other in terms of their belief system. They might not be conscious of that, but this is the ground philosophically that these two types of societies are standing on. So you have in the Timaeus, you have the proto-Athenians, we'll call them. They were the ultimate progressive society, or they were the society a la Plato's Republic, where it's like, children are taken away from their parents at birth. They're assigned a job that is most helpful to the state. It goes on and on. It's like, it's pretty much the ultimate, sort of progressive tyranny in a way. Everyone's provided for, though, kind of communistic. And then you have the Atlanteans in Timaeus. They are described as descendants from Poseidon, so coming from the gods. They uphold the traditions given to them by their ancestors. And so they are the right, essentially. They're the ones that uphold the traditional society, right? And what the myth of Atlantis is telling us is that when the Atlanteans, the traditional society, and the Athenians, the progressive society, when they meet, or when they clash in their extreme polarization, the earth shakes, the waters rise, and everybody dies. It destroys the world. Both societies are mutually destroyed, completely annihilated. So should we believe that there was really a big landmass that was sunk under the ocean, and that there was this advanced civilization called Atlanteans that somehow Plato just happened to know about, even though it was 9,000 years before him? Or should we be thinking, based on other things that Plato writes about, like the myth of the androgyne in the Symposium, where in a golden age, humanity had both of their polarities embodied and balanced into one being, and they were happy and prosperous. And then they were split in half, which commences the lowered ages, or the more strife-filled ages, when these two poles are separated in an extreme way. Allegorically, he's not literally saying there were two-headed, four-armed, four-legged androgynes actually out there. You put it in context, these two things with each other, and other things Plato writes about, and you realize a lot of the time what Plato is trying to warn the astute reader about is the destructiveness, or the non-generative ability of polarization between masculine, feminine, right and left, progressive, traditional, across many different axes, mental, physical. Other way to consider it is the problem of theory and praxis, which is the question of, should we just go sit in a cave and meditate and enlighten ourselves to higher ideals, but never do anything with those ideas? Or should we apply philosophy, reason, and logic to the betterment of society and humanity? And, the interesting thing is seems like Plato landed on that for the for the good of society and civilization, we should probably just let society stick with a more traditional mode and let philosophy have its own private existence for the individual. Because like how you get the progressive society that becomes the monstrous left is philosophy gets applied to governance. And it never actually goes well because no one's actually got the perfect answer, right? And philosophy and truth is always an inside job, an internal process. So it's, according to Plato, I'm not saying this is the correct thing, but my reading of Plato is that he considered it safer and better for humanity to more or less stick with a traditional system of governance and not go too crazy trying to fix things, and let people who are interested in wisdom and discovering truth leave breadcrumbs for them to discover that for themselves and within themselves. But, you know, for their own safety, because a lot of times if it doesn't go well, you try to apply truth, reason, logic, philosophy to improvement of governance. You know, if you succeed, you might create like communism and a genocide will happen. Or if you're not successful, they might just kill you for going against the order. So, you know, we're in a different time now where our society is more tolerant of the sharing of ideas. And so we can talk about this stuff a lot more openly than the philosophers of the ancient world could have done safely. But on the other hand, we keep getting these isms crop up. Underneath each one of them is some sort of philosophy that is within its own system. It is logical and consistent and makes sense. But then it's applied to governance, and you know, you get wars and genocide and tons of people die, and then a tyranny out of it. So I don't know. I mean, Plato might have been right that we should just kind of not mix the peanut butter and chocolate and keep philosophy to a personal internal level, and the praxis or practice of applying reason and truth to the betterment of humanity should be a personal thing where you apply it to your own betterment, and just let that little piece of the collective that's you bring more light and coherence to the collective, but not really be trying to engineer a solution for the entire society at large. Because you can't, you know, you can't force somebody to see or comprehend the truth. It's impossible. So, you know, and that's the thing that a lot of conspiracy research type podcasts or listeners are hung up on is they see what's wrong. They see what seem to be solutions. They're angry about why nobody will listen to them about these solutions. And they're shouting from the rooftops and using a lot of energy and having a lot of resentment over it. And that energy could have been put towards the creation of those solutions in their own life more fully. And, you know, it's not about fixing what's out there. That's the old trap that we've been warned about for as long as there've been Plato's writings available to us. And so that's, to me, like why it's very alarming that Plato is getting banned in universities, misunderstood as it is by those university professors. There could be somebody that has the spark of truth and awareness by reading that when they're at the school. I mean, I don't think anyone should go to the universities anyway, but a lot of people are still going to go.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, maybe it's just to say, okay, well, because they are restricting what people can actually study, it's starting to look like that's not a good place to go. If you really want to learn about life and get towards an understanding of what is true, what life's about, you know, purpose, and as you say, you know, we're all, well, all of us are learning that, you know, it's all, as they say, an inside job. So it's what we do, how we interact with others. It's the energy that we put out into the world, and trying to tell everyone what to do is no good when you don't want people telling you what to do, because you're then, you're then contradicting yourself. So you in a in a in the mindset, in the belief system where you don't want people telling you what to do, it's not then appropriate for you to then start telling other people how things should be. It's like, exactly as you say, to start putting this into effect in your own lives, taking the actions that apply in your own life, and that then ripples out. So, because again, so many people take, so, well, there's got to be government, and I know you talking about governance, which is not exactly the same thing. So in the how would you explain governance, and your view on how that would, it's just just your thoughts on that, how that would work?
Well, see, there's the problem there.
Yeah.
There is not an answer to how
No.
that works.
Mm.
Balance is, in your own personal life, balance is a continual act. There is
Yeah.
not a point where you're like, okay, I've achieved health. I'm good. I have found the perfect system and the perfect daily regimen to be exactly healthy perpetually. That doesn't exist, right?
No.
You might find something that works for you for a while, and then you fall out of balance somewhere, and you have to adjust and change something. That's government. You can't. There isn't a governance or government that will be perfect, right?
Mm.
So, and the more that you try to force the external to conform to what you think would be right or best for you or your people, it does not apply to other people who have other life situations. So, I used to be quite far into the like anarchy belief that we should abolish all government. Government is mind control. Government is slavery, yada, yada, yada. Like, I know all that stuff. I know all the arguments for why that's the case. They're very compelling arguments, and they're very victimized mindsets, unfortunately. And the truth, I'm just going to stick with the truth that I've discovered in my life, that it doesn't matter what is happening out there, or what we could just replace the word government with cartel, right? They're just gangsters. they're basically, the mob. The government and the mob are the same thing. And that's actually just part of existence in a physical reality, I've decided, or that's where I've come to, that there's going to be people are going to collectivize. They're going to operate in cartel-like or mafia-like systems. And, from their perspective and in their personal lives, the people, the theys, whoever they are, they're doing what is best for them, their family, and their people, probably. Even if that looks a little brutal, ruthless, or evil to other people that are not benefiting in the same way. And so what makes it really brutal and evil and ruthless to those on the receiving end of the exploitations of mafias, aka governments, are the people that put themselves in the higher levels of dependency to them. And a lot of people are born into a higher level of dependency to them. So that's unfortunate. That's the only thing that we can really change in our personal life, is disentangle our level of dependency on those systems. We cannot abolish them. We can't stop people from collectivizing and acting in mob-like fashion. Cannot stop it. As soon as you try to enforce them, the theys not acting like a mob, now you're the one that's doing the tyranny. You're the one restricting their freedom. So
Precisely.
I find that the whole like anarchy movement, anarchy philosophy is a waste of time. That's probably not popular to some people to hear, but I've been, I've thought about this a lot, and I was in that mindset for a long time, the government is slavery mindset. And then eventually, gradually I just kind of like lost interest as I started improving my own life and getting less dependent on certain things. So it's up to us individually, like the balance we want to strike between how much we rely on the system and how much we rely on just our own self. And I think for most people in the modern world, it's going to require you to rely on the system somewhat to live the life that is desired by you. Like, I need Zoom. I need a computer. I need an internet service provider to do the stuff I like to do. And I'm at peace with that. I'm at peace with the ways in which my dependency on some of these things can create frustrations if they don't do the thing I want them to do or the way I want them to do it. But at the end of the day, yeah, I alleviate those frustrations by remembering that I agreed to be served by them in the service that they're offering. And, government's the same way. It's offering a service. And I don't think that uh, there's a way to fix it by force. I don't think there's a way to abolish it. I think there's just improving your own morality and letting that ripple out into your personal world and influence the people that you're close with. And, it's always been a bottom up thing. Government wouldn't look so evil and so despotic if more people were moral, which is why I think Plato, going back to Plato, why he landed on a preference for society to be governed in a traditional fashion over the progressive fashion, because at least with the traditionalism, there is some adherence to morality that has been established, and is a baseline of morality to it. Whereas the progressivism throws morality out, it becomes a postmodern. There's no objective morality. There's no objective truth. And when you come down on it, like, in the, how that's reflected, how this truth of the traditional society being preferential to the progressive society, how that's modeled in the individual's life is like, families tend to thrive more when the father of the family is in the leadership role and the mother is in the nurturing support role, right? Like when the mom wears the pants and the dad is a pushover, usually that family doesn't stay together, or it's not a fun family to be in at the very least. It's not a prosperous family to be in. So if we just kind of magnify that microcosm, macrocosm in a similar sense, like, yeah, the traditional society is probably healthier for us in the long run, but we should be wary of how that is, contaminated by the extremity of the pendulum swing, like is happening right now. Because if we were to pivot into talking a little bit about religion as another situation here, it's that our traditional side of our society, our conservative side of our society, is actually quite disconnected from the tradition that it thinks that it's supporting.
Yes, I was
And
going to suggest, because it seemed to me that we would be moving into that, because that, as you say, the right is the tradition, but it is connected to that, the very strong basis on the religion, and at the same time that has its problems because as you're going to go into. So I perfect kind of a transition into that topic, because it's an important one.
yeah, and I mean, if I was going to say how is it disconnected from its own traditions, it's, well, how many people have any kind of like folkloric knowledge of herbalism in the world? There's a resurgence of that amongst individuals, right? But one thing that's a component of a traditional society where folk knowledge of remedies, healing, self-sufficiency with plants was passed forward from, parent to child and within societies and villages going hundreds and hundreds of years, right? Well, we're disconnected from that. And in fact, there's a lot. Okay. So there does seem to be almost like of the two polarities, right? The progressive side or the left side is the more by nature deceptive side, right? And that's because if we boil this down into the microcosm of nature again, it's like the female being not as strong as the male needs to be smarter about, trickiness, essentially, sometimes. That's just how it is. Like, think about how women communicate in a lot of social senses, in like their tendencies, right? They tend to communicate more in indirect ways, right? You're this is an old Owen Benjamin joke, right? But like you're sitting on the couch watching a movie with your wife, and your wife is like, "Do you think it's cold in here?" And the husband is like, it's all right, maybe a little. But do you think it's cold in here? It means, will you get me a blanket or will you turn the thermostat to be warmer? Right? You know that ladies are like that. They're indirect with how they communicate. It's just kind of like a natural way for them. And it's when that's taken into like an extreme, it becomes just kind of more of a tendency for being deceptive, right? So what I mean by that is why I'm talking about this is while there appears to be this pendulum swing towards the traditionalism and conservatism, a lot of that is a veneer. It's a veneer for the continuation of the progressivism, right? And I think why I say that is like the Orange Man was never a Republican before he took office as a Republican, right? And I don't care about Republican or Democrat. I'm not like on a side there, right? But or look at the example of, like I just said, universities starting to ban stuff now for the opposite reason. Well, that's them making progress. they're making progress. They're canceling stuff that's from the past. There's wisdom from enlightened ancestors, right? That's progressivism. It's under the veneer, the illusion of we're doing this because we're conservatives. But no, what I think is actually happening right now is the left, if you will, is, if we want to call it that, the it's actually continuing its reign, but pretending to be the other side, right? That's just kind of my that's kind of my opinion, and I think that Christianity and the mainstream religions are kind of an example of that, because they're so far disconnected from the esotericism of their original systems and original traditions that, to me, that looks like a cancellation of a nullification of the tradition itself, where it's just how many people that are religious types believe in scientism wholeheartedly, believe in the medical establishment and the progress of, the shots and the pills and the antibiotics and all that, right? And how many of them have any idea of what the tradition that their mythology is based on is rooted in? How many of them see in the cathedral, or if they ever looked at like Renaissance paintings of the four apostles, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you see them depicted with their four animals, the eagle, the lion, etc., and how many of them have any clue why those animals are shown with those four apostles having anything to do with the stars and astrotheology, with the four royal stars? None. Zero, right? In fact, it's considered blasphemy. That's the crazy thing, is it's considered blasphemy by a lot of people in their religious ideology when you even discuss the traditional aspects of their system, or how, God forbid you go back further than Christianity and show how the same themes in their Christian mythology existed in other mythologies around the world prior to Christianity.
And lots of them. I mean, so many parallels. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's yeah. But as you say, very few traditional, but they're considered conservative, right wing.
But they're
religious.
Not. That's the crazy thing, is they're actually in the strict sense of like yin and yang. They're really not. They're still progressive. That's the interesting thing. So the actual traditional society and what it means, like how it looks, how it operates, almost completely gone. It almost doesn't exist. And that to me is what's most bizarre, is how we're in this almost like meta pendulum where we have the appearance of swinging from right to left, but we're really just far left and swinging around right to left within the left side. I don't even know how else to describe it. It's like but we haven't seen traditionalism for a really long time. The only places where it actually exists are like Amish communities and things like that. And we don't need to be Luddites or whatever,
No, no.
but we need some balance, and we need to actually, I think it's very valuable, and why I'm so interested in this type of comparative mythology type studies is because I think there's, like the whole first hour of this conversation came from me looking at Plato. And if we're not able to even access that ancient wisdom, or we think that it has no value, we think it's blasphemous, we are missing out on a lot of potential um, personal benefit, I think. A lot of personal benefit.
Well, again, denying traditions of the past means that people aren't going to be looking at the old writing, or it's not old writings, but again, we've got to be careful with, what we say is history. But I mean, that there's sort of, there's only so much. At the same time, there are, and I know you refer to the Reverend Robert Taylor and his work of, and people like him are few and far between, but just because there's only, maybe him or, a handful of other people, can't dismiss them because they were saying something different. It's to not necessarily take them literally, but to understand what they were talking about in the same way as, in my research into the whole medical thing, looking back at the, the writings of the 1900s when people were. Yes, thank you. Yes, I thought I should have a copy of that. But yeah, looking back at the writings of how many critics there were of the whole vaccination thing, that and to say, they're dismissed and say, oh, well, they're not important. You go, no, we can't dismiss this. We've got to be aware and to say, well, why were they saying what they were saying, and to look at it. So I mean, I know that's not the same thing, but again, looking, and I think you said yourself, that it's getting more difficult to access this information because it's either being withdrawn from internet searches, or they're not in public libraries, or they're only in private collections. So there's obviously an effort to keep us away from that, and then you have to say why, and it makes me want to look even deeper, because they're obviously hiding things that they know will help us see things differently and help us. So I don't want to do the they and the victim stuff as well. It's just really being aware of this other information, to really look deeply, and yet so many people just look at headlines, and it's this short attention span, the whole tech speak originally, and then these the Twitter and all that nonsense of just being able to only give a little short clip, so you have to condense everything, when for the most part it's difficult to condense. There's so much richness once you start diving down all of this. But as you say,
The
with
devil is in the details.
Oh, yes,
Can
yes,
we take a really short pause?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'll be right back.
I just did a pause there. So yeah, uh, yes, I mean, we can sort of develop that, as you say, with the stories that people take as history, the origin stories that are in the Bible, that really, and a lot of other, well, mainly the Bible, but other origin stories are taken as literal. And as you say, there's so much more to it once you start looking. And I know astrotheology is something you've looked into, and the connection between those stories and those characters, and why those four was to say one's a man, but those creatures are there because they are important indicators of a deeper message that is within those stories. It's and yet many religions, many people who are religious are following their stories as literal history.
Yeah, I think the book of Genesis is a great example because it's I can't understand how anyone could take it literally. And also the translation into English loses so much meaning that we're not even talking about the same story once you start to look at it in the Hebrew. For example, it doesn't say in the beginning, it says it's more like the actual language is barasit is the first word, which means by wisdom or by the head. So it's by wisdom or out of the head God created, or actually Elohim, which is God's plural. The gods created heaven and earth, yada yada, right? So just right there, the first line, we have such dramatically different meaning. Is it in the beginning God created, or even when you get into some debatable linguistics of the word Elohim, it actually there's a strong case to be made based on the termination ending with mem, the letter M, that it's a feminine plural. So goddesses created. Wow, now we're really in a different place. By wisdom, the goddesses created, right? That is a completely different first line. And also, understanding that there's no reason to consider the serpent of Genesis to be malevolent, evil, the devil, none of that. That's all later Christian dogma and ideology. And back to this concept that the greatest mystery of the religious traditions was always the generative power, right? Because that is the greatest mystery in our personal life. Where do babies come from? Trust me, I wonder about that. My baby announced herself in a dream before she came, before we knew we were pregnant. Right? There is something, somebody, her soul existed prior to coming into that body and into that womb. Why does sometimes the egg fertilize by the sperm and the spark of life enter, and other times it doesn't? There's obviously maybe some physical component to that biologists study and all that, but there's also a great mystery as to what is the consciousness that enters into that form. When does it begin? Some people have their parents that talk about their children describing memories of being in the womb, but perceiving things that the mother was doing as if they could see and hear. There's tons of documented cases of that sort of stuff, right? And it might not be common to every person's experience, but you have to ask yourself, is that part of the reason behind the, injection schedules? And I think one of the biggest is the biggest things that slows down the little kids is the epidural. Man, having now seen a baby, growing up the first year of life, no epidural. My daughter, complete natural birth, has never seen a doctor in her life and has never had any kind of medicine or pharmaceutical in her body whatsoever. Well, I take that back. There was a numbing agent used when we had her tongue tie released. So very small, but okay, that's the one pharmaceutical intervention. And we took that one, and that was for a good reason. But my point being, you see other babies and they're asleep for the first 3 to 5 months of their life and barely kind of with it. And then the non-epidural baby is super aware, super aware. And this is not to shame people that, especially not to shame mothers that, accepted that or thought they needed that or did need that for some reason. It's just the point being there's so many things that stack the deck so that the beginning of the child's life is less conscious. And I want to talk about the epidural because I think the half-life of that particular sedative in the baby's body lasts a very long time. I think that's why babies tend to be so sleepy the first few months of life, right? So going
Yeah,
back to this,
I've not looked into that one actually. Yes, that wasn't any part of my experience. So um, at the same
well,
time,
I'm
yes,
not
I
trying to
hadn't.
brag because it was my wife
No,
that did it all. I was just there to hold her hand and get her fingers crushed during the the birth.
right.
I was not the brave one that made those decisions to be fully natural. But I'm witnessing how that makes a difference. And I'm wondering, like, what stories is she going to tell us when she can fully verbalize and talk in a couple of weeks or months, however long it is. Not going to be long. I'm kind of curious. I'm going to be asking a lot of those questions, like, where were you before you came here? Right? Like, what do you remember about being inside your mom? Because I think that there will be answers to that stuff. I've heard enough accounts of parents who have had those kind of answers given to them by their children.
Yes, and when children are young, they're still somewhat more connected to the that sort of expanded consciousness, if you like. Uh, they are present. They're not as present. They're still open to that. So, and that's where children have, small children have different ideas about, invisible friends and things like that, and they're told to stop it. You're being, they're patronized, and it's like, oh, by a lot of people. Whereas being asked about it, she'll feel comfortable to talk about it
And
because
I bring that up because it's
mm,
another one of these parallels to the overarching thesis we've been developing, which
mm,
is that the progressive society cuts humanity or attempts to cut humanity off from where they came from, right? And that's in the microcosm of the birth of a child, all of these medical interventions and drugs, they further strengthen the separation from wherever they came from before birth, right? They eventually, naturally people forget whether it's past lives, if that's a thing, or just like the spirit world prior to coming into a body, whatever it may be. But it seems like the medical system, maybe not intentional to the individuals perpetrating it and who work in the system, but overall, it's part of this larger pattern of cutting us off from where we came from before. you know, it's just interesting. It's part of it's the same
it
pattern.
is. It's another one of those isms because it's the scientism of moving us away from understanding our true nature as being beyond the physical. It's the materialistic. It's all very deterministic, materialistic, and well, this is all there is, and moving us away from that understanding. Only I know there's a huge movement back towards expanding our understanding and looking. A lot more people are aware of our that there's more to us, and that, again, we'll come into that because it ties into where you're working the biofield tuning, because you're accessing your intuition in a way that, I mean, I from what I've looked into, it tends to be more women who are biofield tuners, although that's not it's it's not to say that men obviously, but and from what you say, you very much work intuitively, so you are accessing that part of you without it turning you into a feminized guy. You're a masculine guy and recognizing your feminine traits. So that goes back to where we started, of that having the abilities on both sides. So it's recognizing those intuitive skills, talents, abilities, and tapping into them. And because you access them fairly at a fairly young age, you were aware, you were aware intuitively of all sorts of phenomena. You sort of connected.
I think my wife is right when she says that it's my open head center that gives me access the way I have access in human design, right?
Yes.
According to human design, all of my centers are defined except my head is open. And that's how I experience it in my intuitive powers or what have you. In tuning is, I don't, this is not how it would be taught by Eileen's courses, but I think Eileen's courses probably teach people that they're going to have their own way of accessing the information whenever something comes in. Eileen describes it as kind of coming in the back of her neck. She calls it her mail slot. For me, it's more in my head itself and in my ears. I get like pops. My ears pop, or inside my head, there's like clicking, almost like electrical sensation that happens whenever I pass the fork over the spot where there's like stuck energy. So, and it took me a little while to trust that, because I'm like, I've never heard anyone talk about this before. What is this? But it became clear the more I trusted it that it was always correct. Like just the other day in a session, I'm working with somebody that is let's see, the issue had to do with basically having problems with coworkers who technically under her at work, where she felt like they would sort of gang up on her, passive aggressively talk about her behind her back, make fun, laugh at her, whatever, feeling sensitive to that kind of behavior with people that are her coworkers. And the very first thing I find, boom, I think 3 years of age is where it was at. And I was like, oh, it's siblings. You're the youngest of my ears pop. I get the information. I'm like, oh, you're the youngest of multiple siblings, and you felt excluded by them when you were a kid. Like they would do stuff without you or not let you participate in stuff. And so that's kind of how I explained it. And that ended up being completely accurate. So there's more to the tuning session than that, but that was the foundation that helped us deal with her issue most completely. Was like, okay, and this was actually showing up in the left ankle, the back of the left ankle. And the left ankle has to do with attachment to different kinds of stressors or fears. So this was somebody who had a deeply conditioned fear of being left out, you could say, being excluded, but was unconscious of it, was not aware of it. And we make that connection. And I don't think you could ever see the trigger that you have towards how people might behave. And, coworkers are not siblings, right? But what do we call our work family, people that we work with? And we're in the same building with them 5 days a week, 8+ hours a day. And you spend more time with them than your actual family by the time you're in like a full-fledged full-time job career, right? So in terms of how your energy body is interpreting these interactions, it might as well be family at that point. It's very similar. So anyway, that was a particularly cool session. We recommended Nettle for that because I recommended Nettle for that. I say we because it turned out after I recommended Nettle, because Nettle helps with the Martian aspect of self, like taking action instead of being passive. Because this person was having a response to the perceived like threat or passive aggressiveness of other people, of kind of like withdrawing and avoiding, which is a passive reaction herself. We see how that works. It's like what we're sensitive to in other people, something that we're not necessarily accepting within ourselves, right? So Nettle, right? Take action. Withstand irritation. Because nettle, stinging nettle, right? It's irritating to the skin. So nettle is a good medicine for helping somebody withstand irritants and also take action where we've been passive. And then in the lore mythology of nettle, I believe it's Celtic mythology, they would use it to protect themselves from elf shot. It's what they called it. When you have random pain, probably what the modern system would call like arthritic pain or things like that, but like unexplained, mysterious pains in the body, they believed that you were being shot at by jealous little elves. And
Okay.
so I recommended like, okay, get some nettle for those jealous little elves that you work with shooting their shot at you. And it turned out that her boyfriend, who was a listener to the podcast, who had referred her to get up tuning with me, that he had her taking nettle for a little while already. And I was like, oh, I love that. I love that. That happens all the time with one of the things that's most exciting to me is I've been like incorporating herbalism into my tuning sessions and recommending plants that resonate to the nature of what we're healing in the particular session. And most of the time, I would say 75% of the time, which is a wildly high probability, the person will already have happened to just got that thing or have had it for a little while but not been using it yet or just started using it. But like it's always just bang on like that. There was another session last week where recommended mullein for this person, and she had a mullein tincture that she had made herself but had only taken once, that she made from taking a course with my friend Kyle at Denton at Tippecanoe Herbs. I'm like, this, you can't make this up.
No,
So that's,
that's the synchronicity. You know, that
yeah,
just they happen so much more frequently when you're open to all of this and the connection. And as you say, so many times, you know, you hear something once and think, oh, that's interesting, and something keeps popping up, and you think there's something here for me because it keeps popping up. So you look into it, and then you realize that there's definitely something in it for you. You know, there's a message there for you. Yeah, I mean, it's you know, that uh example is so typical of like Eileen says, of energy being stuck emotion or stuck energy. You know, emotions cause stuckness in the energy field. And it's not necessary to particularly know what it is. But as you say, you can pick up on just by having your tuning fork in the field to know when it was, where it was, you know, the age and the kind of issue. Because again, it's the, as you were saying, like the body map, different parts of our bodies relate to different emotions and different types of stuckness. And, you know, once you start putting all that together, it's just incredible how well you can see what we're how we are is a reflection of, you know, our life. You know, we our beliefs affect our lives, and things can get stuck when we've got limiting beliefs about something. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, you've been yeah, I mean, you taught yourself the tuning method, as you say, because you went with something that resonated for you. And as you, I had a conversation with Eileen last year, you know, at the end, towards the end of last year, and you know, so she was saying about how she, you know, finds the body map. So uh, the method is not like a method, but it's trusting intuition to and to kind of sense what it is. But in terms of the age, there's a definite uh, range, isn't there? Because of the field being 6. Oh, I'll let you explain. You know that our biofield is 6 feet, and therefore you can get a rough idea.
yeah. Well, okay. So one area that I don't know that Eileen would agree with me about this, and I'm not saying I'm absolutely right about this, but I theorize that the body map or the biofield anatomy might not be literally defined as we interact with it in tuning. That what I mean by
Oh,
that is, and okay, because hear me out. This is just a
mm,
theory. I could
mm,
be wrong. It could be literally there. I mean, it works as if it's literally there and consistent and true, as if it's like a physical structure that we just can't see. But what we're dealing with in tuning is essentially mental energy. You know, there's a lot of even more modern scientists that have been working with the hard problem of consciousness that materialism has so utterly failed to address that think that the consciousness is actually in the electromagnetic field, not in the brain somewhere. That it's the field that's controlling the body rather than the body generating the field. And that makes a lot of sense because think about like somebody could die, right? The spark is gone, the light has left their eyes, but processes in the body are still kind of like happening as there's continued electricity in the body, right? But the soul has evacuated. Or they, to bring somebody back, you know, they shock them, they like restart the electromagnetic field in a way. That's, you know, aside from the point, but I think that this biofield, our electromagnetic plasma medium that our body is within, is mental in nature. Like it is our mind manifest in a way. And if it's mental, and I think in the Hermetic axiom of mentalism that all is mind, that the entire reality itself is a mental thing. It's all in your head, so to speak. Your body is in your mind, not your mind in your body. The world is in your mind, not your mind in the world, right? We understand that. Then we get a lot more flexibility with how we comprehend this stuff. And so to me, I tend to operate like, and this helps with the flexibility and fluidity of how I interpret stuff as well in the individual case by case basis. I tend to look at the biofield anatomy as an intellectual scaffolding or a language through which I can communicate with a body, my body to their body, so to speak. Let me give a alternative example that will support this. Think about astrology, right? How many systems of astrology do you know of? How many different ways to read a chart are there actually? More than you could count, right? I mean, aside from just the sidereal versus tropical, there's also a bunch of different ways to draw a chart within each of those systems, you know, particularly when it comes to the delineation of houses and that, you know, and the logic that goes behind that. Yet, some people experience sidereal astrology to be completely spot on, bang on, accurate, perfect. And other people, and I'm more of a tropical guy, they use tropical astrology and it's like, that could not be more accurate, more perfect. So what's up with that? I have a sense that it's an idea I've been working on for, you know, in my own personal quest to understand this stuff for a while. But I think it's the patterns themselves are not what matters so much as the fact that there is a structure and a pattern that allows something to be read from between the lines of that pattern. Let me put it in a different way. They call God the Father, right? And that word is in Greek or Roman languages is pater. Pater. It's where we get the word. The word pattern actually comes from father, right? And so when we're like where that comes from, it has to do with astrotheology, that heaven is God, or like the sky and heaven and God are like all the same thing. God is the whole thing, right? And when we consider astrology, it's like the entire sky reflects the entirety of the individual person's experience and the entirety of the collective. It's this universally accessible and visible reflection of both microcosm and macrocosm. But to make any sense of that reflection of the sky, you have to apply a logic or a structure or a pattern to it. And then, not just that, but then you have to read the changing relationships of different aspects of that pattern over time. Okay? And so the biofield, and I think this relates to how Eileen has actually been, you know, over the last couple of years talking about perceiving people's natal chart patterns in their biofield, which I have too in some instances where I've looked for it. The biofield is very much the same way. It's a big field of energy. You know, it's a big pattern, but that has no real specific shape to it until you start looking for the relationship from between things, right? And this, to make this make more sense, it's like in a tuning session, it's not just about playing a fork around the body and getting a benefit from it. There is some benefit to just coherent sound and witness of energy, but where a lot of the benefit comes from is like, okay, what's going on the left side of your sacral chakra? Okay, what's going on the right side of your heart chakra? You know, and go on and on. But as we progress through different parts of the biofield, we're like, oh, we're having aha moments about how this spot is reflecting something in relationship to what we noticed over here in this spot. They're, you know, it's like this stuck energy isn't just here and then we solve it and then we go here and then we solve it. It's like a belief system that's restricting or unbalancing someone's life force is happening in multiple places in the field simultaneously, right? So I don't know if I'm explaining this super well. It's a little abstract, but I actually think that the biofield itself is like the sky, where you could potentially name different constellations and patterns out of that big blob of lights and luminaries, right? And where the information is accessible to us is how we read the relationship between those things. I got this idea further developed by understanding that this is where astrotheology and the religions actually come from. It's not just about divine revelation, right? They consider scriptures to be divine revelation. They're reading a story out of the sky. That's the original scripture. They're saying, oh, here's the constellation Virgo. That means that in this story of this time that represents this time of year or this part of the cycle, there's a virgin character in it, right? But more than that, the ancient priesthood was really into punning, essentially. And that, you know, being versed in multiple languages, they would be able to describe how, or they'd be able to read how this star or this constellation in this language is this word, but in this language it's that word. But this other word sounds like a word in this other language that means this. And so when they're constructing these stories out of a particular stellar tableau, you call it, or a picture in the sky, they are reading between the lines, finding wordplay and puns of what they can read up there. And when they discover a pun or a wordplay that they previously did not know, it was considered to be divine revelation. That was God speaking to them, giving them wisdom. That was literally God talking to them. Okay, there's a word for it in the Mesopotamian system or the Babylonian system called Lumashi. And there's even, whether or not this is historically accurate, you know, or historically in the context that it's placed in, that's questionable and debatable. But one thing we can say about any of these particular like literatures and artifacts that may or may not be chronologically true in the way they're placed by the academic mainstream history, they all still exhibit the pattern of the particular system of priesthood that is universal. So whether or not they fit into the chronology, they do portray the pattern. And this idea of Lumashi from the Mesopotamian system or the cuneiform tablets where it's described, written about extensively by my friend John McHugh in a book called The Celestial Code of Scripture. He has gone through meticulously many different miracle stories of the Bible and the Quran to show exactly where these bizarre ideas come from, like Samson killing 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass. Like, why is that a Bible story? Why would you use the jawbone of an ass to kill 1,000 Philistines? Why not just get a sword or a rock? Like, why? These kind of bizarre details are considered divine revelation from puns and wordplay that are in the stars, right? And so all of that is contingent on the language that the priest speaks, right? Just like astrology in the modern usage is contingent on the system or language, tropical, sidereal, Placidus, equal house, whatever the case may be. I think biofield anatomy is like tropical astrology or sidereal astrology applied to the heavens of the body of the individual. Your mind is your heavens. It's your upper floor, your upper story. So in that sense, I don't know that there's a right biofield anatomy per se. But I'm not saying that the biofield anatomy as I practice it and as Eileen teaches it is wrong either. I think it's a system that has enough that is logical and consistent enough that it can be a place where divine revelation can manifest between the lines of of the words of that language. The words of that language being the attributes applied to the different sectors of the body, left, right, forward, back. So in that because I see it as a languages evolve and update over time, and with usage they become more efficient, sometimes less. And my practice of tuning over the years that I've been doing it is much the same way. I'm still making discoveries where divine revelation is provided to me between the lines of the language that I'm familiar with, and I learn something new about a part of the biofield that I didn't understand before, and then I start seeing it in other people once I've seen it once. I'm pretty sure this is how Eileen developed the language herself to begin with, is through this kind of revelatory process. So I don't, in that sense, I think this is part of what makes it self-teachable, and why even if you do get training, eventually you're going to have your own dialect regardless. And I hope that encourages people to explore with tuning and with the biofield anatomy system, because I'm trying to express that it's a personal communication, or one translator of a text in another language is going to give you a different translation, even though they're both translating from Latin into English, than another one, right? Much the same way, a tuner is a translator of a message that the body is trying to express. It's expressing that message through the language of physical discomfort or physical dysfunction. One thing that I don't remember ever reading in Eileen's books, but I have discovered as part of my language with the biofield anatomy, is that sometimes I find, the edge of somebody's field, instead of being 6 feet away from their body, in one spot or another, it's like 7 foot or 6.5 foot or 7.5 foot. And it's like a bulge is going on. Or sometimes it's the opposite. It's like pulled in. But more often I find it pushed out. And every time that I discover that in somebody, probably 1 in 5 sessions or less, it's not like super common, there's always some sort of correlative dysfunction in the body in that area. And what I think is going on when I run into that, or what I think is being communicated to me in my own language of the biofield anatomy, is that, okay, this person is in an extreme rejection of the energy that comes in this quadrant, right? Like they're so averse to sadness, right? That the front left side of their heart chakra, or the whole left side of their heart chakra, is bulging out this direction. And they're experiencing asthma symptoms, or like difficulty breathing, or, constriction in the lungs in a extreme way, right? And I found a bunch of times, if I just like explain to them, hey, you're rejecting the energy of this area, you're pushing out, you got a bulge in your field in this area, can we rein it in? And we go through the process of like, I kind of just like grab the edge and bring it in and smooth it over. And then they have like some sort of breakthrough in whatever aberrant expression the body is communicating physically, that is a result of that geometric distortion in their energy field. Is it literally there? Would another tuner have discovered and interpreted it the same way as me? I don't necessarily think so. Does that make it wrong? Does that make it not real? I don't think so. I think
No, I mean, certainly
so.
you get the feedback from your client, or from doing that, that it's not just you working on them, there is as you say, there's an energetic um communication going on. And I think what you've done here is highlighted such an important point that we are all individual, and we can be so fixed on the idea that we have to learn a system and we have to work according to that system, instead of saying, okay, well, that's a general understanding of how it works, if you like, and then if you want a better word, like play with it for yourself to see how it works for us. I mean, a lot of us are not very good at following rules, so it's good to say, okay, well, this is the general outline. That's like recipes. It was like, okay, well, that's a basic kind of thing. Well, what can I do to change it around?
Well, it's like any form of art, right? Uh,
Yes, it's
the the
individual.
the best artists, they learn the rules, or like musicians, they learn styles, systems, scales, and they get really proficient at those, and then they start bending and breaking those rules, and you get, whoa, virtuoso masterpiece stuff. So by no means am I like discouraging people from taking the training with Eileen. I think that they ought to if they have the means and the interest, for sure. It's great. I know lots of people that have taken it and benefited hugely, even if they didn't become practitioners. The knowledge of your biofield anatomy or that language is just as important as the knowledge of your natal chart. In some ways, maybe more, honestly. I think it's a human birthright to be able to translate your body to know, like, hey, I have a pain or injury recurring in my left knee. Where am I holding on to something and not letting go? Simple stuff like that, but you get a flash of insight through it. Once you never don't know, right? You can break a lot of the patterns of life experience that we don't enjoy are rooted in some sort of belief that is mirrored by a physical ailment in the body, and people don't even realize that this thing that keeps happening that I don't like in my life and this chronic ouchie that I've got are the same thing. And they're going
Oh,
back to this childhood
absolutely.
experience.
Yeah. I mean, that's something uh I've been looking into and moving into, sort of, that's more of the kind of where I am with mine, that the the physical and the emotional are just so interconnected. And in the same way, like with astrology, well, it's not just our, the sun sign there, so it's everything else. And again, they're tendencies, so that it's not like fixed, that our astrology chart doesn't tell us what to do. It's more kind of tendencies, and it's not to take it as being, um as you say, fixed, because it's always moving anyway. There are things, moving, so it's always uh in flow, so there's always a flow, and it's not fixed at any point. So I think it's great that you're integrating the two, and being open to the the general tendency. So like you say, with the sort of, the left knee, it's, kind of suggests something. It's, if you like, the starting point, but not necessarily the thing. Oh, it's fixed. So I think it's that point of being flexible, which does require tuning into your own intuition, being open to the information that will drop in. And again, we pick up intuitions differently depending on, you know, well, yeah, because we're just different. It's like, that's it. We all work differently.
What's
So
cool
some,
about receiving
mm,
a tuning
mm,
is, just like it may seem mysterious or magical or far out that a tuner like myself will be, I'm in another state or another country and I'm waving tuning forks around and asking you questions about a certain year of your life and like that exact thing or something similar enough that it's mind blowing actually happened when you were that age. Like, how does that, how does that work? How do you do that? But on the receiving end of the tuning, What's really cool is the perturbation of stagnant energy in somebody's field, which is mental in nature and thus also has a memory component to it, just like all belief systems are rooted in some experience, that you, as the recipient of a tuning, can actually experience the flash of intuitive insight or the dropping in, as you put it, of information. And in fact, in any good tuning session, you absolutely will experience that. And what that looks like is a sudden and spontaneous recall of a totally otherwise forgotten memory of an experience. Like that's to in and of itself, that is a fascinating situation. Like why do you remember this thing that happened when you were 8 years old, and it made like, once it comes up, it just pops into your head after I've been putting my fork in that spot in your life field. Uh, where did that come from? Why is that what's being remembered, amongst all things that have ever happened in your life? Why is that one thing all of a sudden accessible and clear and recalled by you? And then the tuner, or myself in this case, is then able to help you see the connection of what that memory represents, how it relates to the current life situation that feels stuck, how it reflects in some ways is identical to the current life situation that is stuck. And, it might not occur to a lot of people on the receiving end, but when you had that memory pop up clearly and out of the blue, spontaneously like that, you were practicing the exact same psychic openness that the tuner is practicing when they're getting the insights. Like to me, that's really cool. So receiving tunings, as somebody that both gives and receives them, on either end of it, you are creating a space and an opportunity to connect with your inner knowing in a very powerful and very practically helpful way. I'm excited. I have a tuning coming up, not this week, but next week, with my friend Joseph, Go Forth Soundworks. We're exchanging sessions with each other. And, I'm trying to get into the rhythm of getting myself tuned at least like every 3 months, because I find that that's kind of the cutoff point to where if I don't do it about every 3 months, my forward progress starts to stagnate or reverse. And I think different people in different health situations or life situations might, be different in a different rhythm of how often it's helpful. But to me, that seems like my clients that come to me about every 3 months are the ones that are making the best progress in their life. And I'm finding that in myself too. And one thing I want to say is I recently just changed up my offering for people that have been tuned by me before or looked at it on my website before. I used to do 1 hour sessions, and with experience, I'm finding that a lot of the latter 15 minutes of a tuning session are not as efficient or helpful as the first 30-45 minutes. So I'm just cutting it down to 45-minute sessions instead of an hour. I've reduced the price because of that. So people that maybe thought it was a little too much, maybe it's in their price range now. And also I'm excited to say that I finally have set up a system where people can book their time with me at the point that they're paying and not have to wait for me to send them a scheduling link and work it all out. So, part of my rebirth for this year, back-end improvements, is a much more streamlined experience for getting a session with me where you can see the availability before you pay and book and pick a time. And hopefully that will encourage a lot more people to try it. Also, that it's a little less expensive than it was. Minorly shorter time commitment, not a big difference, but I'm looking forward to the coming year and seeing all the ways in which this language updates and evolves itself in my personal practice, because it just keeps, for me, it's been mostly the plants, how herbalism ties into tuning and supports it has been mind-blowing. But that was a lot last year. I think that will continue into this year. But I don't know what 2026's big, change in my process or my interpretation of the language is going to look like. It will be something. I'm excited.
Well, it's always good to be open to change and not to see change as necessarily a bad thing. But uh, uh, I noticed on your website you're offering oracle card readings. Are you still doing those? Are those going forward? If people are interested, and how if you want to talk about more about how that actually works for people.
Yeah, nobody ever asks me about that, so I appreciate that. I do way more tunings than Oracle card sessions because I don't necessarily promote it. But my friend Marty Leeds, he often talks about fortune telling and how, you know, despicably stupid and awful it is. And I think when people see tarot or oracle cards, I call it oracle cards because I'm combining a lot of different systems. They think fortune telling, like you're going to tell me my future. Yeah, right. Or there's a lot of YouTubers out there who will ask questions on a live stream. They'll ask a question about like some current event or future event, or like, is Donald Trump really secretly a Jew? Oh, nope, the cards say he's not. Like, and this has just thrown such and I think it's been this way for a long time, but the current climate is particularly ugly about how divination tools are perceived and misused. So even though, like Marty, for example, he points out how the Bible does not like divination. Like divination is specifically a word that's like a bad thing to do. But I would disagree with him on the point that divination is divine in. Like you're divining, you're bringing the divine into yourself or out of yourself is a way to consider it. It is in the way that I practice readings with people has nothing to do with telling them the future or even answering a specific question for them or questions. I don't ask them anything before we go into it about what they want to know or what they're wondering about. I have a system. I have like a certain spread layout that I use, and I use the I Ching, I use the tarot, I use depending on the individual and what I'm intuited to do. I use other systems like shamanic archetype symbolism or plant symbolism, things of that nature, crystal symbolism, just depends on the individual. But what I'm doing is drawing out the relationship between cards or hexagrams in the case of the I Ching of different systems and communicating what is being expressed, especially in the synchronicity between these systems, right? Like we might get a card that has a lion on it and from some oracle deck, and then get the strength card out of the tarot, and then get, you know, multiple things that have the same symbol from different systems where the probability becomes really unlikely, really low. But most important is back to what I was trying to express about astrology and about the biofield anatomy. It's not just about this one card or this one hexagram. It's about the interrelationship between them. It's the liminal space between the archetypes, how they relate to each other, how they flow into each other, where there's very specific information that's going to be applicable to them personally in ways that I have no idea. Just reading it, I just get into kind of a flow state as I go through one to the next. And then at the end, they're like, then they will reflect back to me how the things that I said while going through the different cards and their relationships, the thoughts and the inspirations that were garnered about what they're going through in life or what they're planning to do next in life or what they're afraid to do but know they need to, or whatever the case may be. Like in a personal note, I once had a tarot reading with a professional. Joel Rafidi from Here From the Truth.
Yeah.
He does readings, and
Oh,
I did.
yes, yeah.
Yeah, I had a reading with him, and like I asked internally like a really personal question, because I was going through the beginnings of what became a divorce at that time years ago. And I was holding on, like I didn't want this to happen. I don't want to have to deal with this. And I asked, like, is this really what I want? Do I really want to end this? I didn't ask him. I just internally asked that. And then the next card he flips is the Empress card reversed, which is like, to me, that was 100% symbolizing like my relationship to the divine feminine is all upside down right now. I am not into the situation that I'm in. Like I need to rectify this, right this, and take decisive action. This is over, right? But it's not like the card told me what to do and I did it. It's that the card showed me, helped me get real with how I really felt and what I really knew already, but was resisting. And that's what divination is about. It's about helping you see what you already know, what you may have been hiding from yourself, but drawing out the truth, wisdom, that's already in the room with you that maybe you're blind to, or just giving you extra confirmation where it's like, I have this intuition, but how can I just trust this random whim, And like, okay, I'll give you some synchronicities through these cards that will invite you to trust what you already know. But I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not telling you what's going to happen. I'm giving you an opportunity to generate some synchronicity and see yourself and your life more clearly. That's what it's about. And they're super powerful. Most of the time it's just like helping somebody trust their own innate powers and aptitudes where maybe they felt a bit cut off or disconnected from them. So has nothing to do with fortune telling, has everything to do with connecting you with the divinity, or AKA capital T truth, that you already contain.
And that's the point, that we do know so much, and a lot of it, we cut ourselves off because we're indoctrinated out of believing in ourselves, of trusting our inner intuition.
We need the experts.
Well, it's
expertitis.
Well, yes, and that's why it's good to have that open attitude when you're approaching something, something like a an oracle card reading, or something else, to say, okay, be open to the message that comes back, because the message is from yourself to yourself. It's learning to read that. And I mean, as you said, we can't see our own blind spots. We can be struggling with something, there's an inner conflict, and sometimes we don't know which is the air quotes, right thing to do, because the both voices sound so strong, and so they're different thoughts on that. And so sometimes it's to be able to break that impasse, when we're stuck in that place of like, okay, just something. And as you say, when you see whatever that, that next card, it just releases something to say, okay, that's what that meaning is, that the meaning does speak to me, in all sorts of ways. I mean, yes, no, I mean, I know Marty too. I mean, he did a great series of his church services, a series on the tarot. So that was fascinating. That was amazing.
And what he does when he talks about the tarot is he talks about the universal truths that the cards contain, which is, when I'm doing a reading, I just talk about the universal truths that the cards contain, and then the relationship between them, almost as like a flow of, I like the I Ching. How I describe the I Ching is 64 hexagrams that represent 64 different configurations or states of consciousness, right? So when you go from one hexagram to another, one state of consciousness to another, that particular shift is in itself really filled with meaning. Like, what does it mean to go from the creative to the receptive, 1 to 2? Like what does it mean to go from the state of decrease, 41, to the state of great power, 24, or vice versa? Like, so there's that's what I mean about between the lines, right? What does it mean to go from the 5 of cups to the Hierophant? Like, there's so much more than just 74 cards. There's all of the flow of one card to another or the other direction. And then even greater, whenever you're going into multiple cards, like I do 8 whenever I read with somebody, sometimes 9. So then like that tapestry becomes huge, which really allows for a very unique message to come through, and very, very cool. So I hope some people check that out, because especially if you combine it with like get a tuning and then do some cards a week or two later, you can really blow minds how just bizarrely in sync the cards will be to the themes of a tuning you just did. That is always fascinating to me. I look at oracle cards or tarot in that usage, like, why does it work? How does it work? And they're a really great practice to build up your trust in the fact that the right thing always happens. There's no such thing as the wrong thing happening. And when you bring reverence, respect, and witness to like, if you just randomly pull cards out and you don't think about it and you're not giving it any kind of like ceremony, you're not really going to get that level of reflectivity or synchronicity. But when you sit down, take it seriously, invest energy into it, and take your time with it, and bring some kind of structure to it. Like when I'm doing it, I'm not just drawing a card, then another card, then another card. Each card has a position in a spread structure, where each position in that spread has a particular underpinning attached to it of meaning. Like this card represents your yin. This card represents your yang. This card represents a message from your body, stuff like that. Right. So there's like levels of, there's like many levels of correlation that are going on with it. I think that's what makes it draw out so much potency of meaning. And then, back to what Marty said, the opposite of that is fortune telling, and like, is Trump secretly a Jew? Oh, no, he's not. I drew the right card, so we can keep trusting the plan. Right. So that's the stuff that he's against, and I'm totally with him on that. But I want to defend, I want to defend divination in its sacred usage, as opposed to its profane, gypsy at the carnival usage.
Oh, yes, yes. There are complete differences, and sometimes these more frivolous uses are introduced to demean the true meaning of the actual traditions of those practices. I mean, you mentioned human design before, but human design is created out of astrology and I Ching and a few others. So yeah, there's so much more to it. It's and again, it's not saying how we are, but is to give us a sort of a sense. And I mean, with the human design, for me, it was more a question of just kind of recognizing, oh, yes, that is how I am. Oh, it's not a problem. It's not that it's like, it's okay. It kind of gave me permission. And not to say, oh, well, I can carry on, because I'm like you, manifesting generator. So we kind of have lots of things on the go. And it was to say, oh, that's okay. It doesn't mean, oh, I can carry on being, very erratic with it, or I should be. It's okay to be erratic with it. It's to recognize that tendency, and at the same time to work with the recognize, if you like, the shadow sides of all these different things, and to see, like, if I'm feeling frustrated, if I go, oh, I'm so frustrated, you go, oh, not self, so there's a way of pulling yourself back into being present, being able to access the best of what we can be in the moment, to and that's really been the theme here, is about everything coming back to us and who we are, which is a common theme with a lot of these conversations of trusting ourselves to a certain extent, and knowing that looking at our intuition as a faculty, not just as that's just a funny voice in my head, or is it telling me the right thing or not, or just being open to it. Or
Yeah. Imagination is not a type of thinking. All thinking is imagining. Imagination is the primary thing. So when you tap into intuition, but it feels like you're just making it up, you got to relearn how to associate that feeling as something good and deep to trust and flow with, rather than to reject because of the fact that it came from strictly inside yourself and nothing outside of yourself informed it. Like if you want to connect with the creator or source, you're going to have to get comfortable with making stuff up, because that's what the creative force is the generative power. It's making it up. So, understand that does not make it untrue, or, and understanding, discerning, dawn and discernment, right? The difference, like that. Yes, there's a sort of danger with that, where people start to say like, well, my truth this, my truth that. And like, okay, but there is a reality out there, right? There's a shared consensus reality that has shared capital T truth, capital R reality, right? And then there's the inner truth that you can access, but you need to be able to discern, that does not become the thing that you need to bludgeon other people with, as like they need to believe it or they're wrong, right? Or I'm going to spread it as if I have some sort of physical grounded evidence for why it exists. Like I channeled that there were men on the dark side of the moon mining, and there's aliens there enslaving these moon men, and it must be true. Or I channeled, what really happened to Atlantis. Like, okay, well, now you are basically, it's the same thing as taking the mythology literally, right? Understand that these things that come out of your intuition, it's like the same as observing the heavens and taking a story from the heavens. Your mind is your heavens. So when you have intuitive knowing of something, right, you need to process that like it's allegory, like it's multifaceted, not like it's an absolute hard and fast literal reality that others need to conform to as well. And that's why I treat biofield anatomy like it's a language, rather than like it's the only way to interpret or read your body. Because there are other modalities out there that are mind body modalities that work for people, right? Like, German new medicine. A lot of practitioners do really good things with German new medicine. I look at that language and I'm like, none of that translates to my experience. Like this is just totally wrong. This doesn't work for me. So like that language, I don't prefer German new medicine as a language. And I also respect that some people speak that language really effectively as a way to translate messages from the bodies of their clients and patients. And they have great success and they help a lot of people. So I'm not dissing GNM, but it's not my language, right? So that at the end of the day, the same thing is occurring. You're helping somebody get to a core shift of their belief system in ways that it has been impeding the function of their body, right? Whichever way you do it. So, I respect it, but that's not my language. Some people might say the same thing about biofield anatomy, and that's why I don't like to assert that like it's the end all be all. But I think it's a particularly good and flexible language, and in my opinion, it's the best one. But that's just me.
Yes, I'm with you on GNM. There's certainly something in it. There's certainly a a mind-body connection.
For
It
me, it's not
does.
flexible enough.
I was just going to say it's too rigid. It's too rigid. It's, oh, it means this, and
This always means this, and I'm like, as soon as you're
mm,
always, I'm like,
yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, so that just says,
we're
no,
not
I'm
all
not
the,
sure.
we're just not all the same.
No, and that's the point. We aren't all the same. We are all individual, and that's why I love the biofield tuning, especially what you've just said about how it's not doing anything. Oh, it's not like a rigid system. It's helping the person access something for themselves, energetically, and being able to help them with something in their lives, if you like. I mean, it's so much more than that, but it's individual. Each session is, even though you say you see patterns, each person is individual. Each session is individual. It is different, even
Very
with
much.
the same person. And again, you were saying about you having sessions every 3 months. It's because there is no such thing as, oh, fixed, got it all sorted, tick that box, I'm healthy, because we're always um sort of exposed to all kinds of things in our lives and different situations, and we're continually being challenged because that's how we evolve and grow. So a new challenge might bring up something that's a new situation and makes us feel uncertain about something, or there could be something stuck in there. So again, that's some stuck emotion of something or other that just, so it helps keep the flow, because there's always something happening in life, because that's life. It changed, the one thing that certain is change, things change. And so, we don't grow if nothing changes.
Yeah, and that's why, well, like if you change too drastically, too fast, you have it, in nature, that's catastrophe. Like the only way things happen to change unbelievably rapid and fast is when you see like cataclysm. That's in nature, right? So the progressivism in society is cataclysmic in terms of its effect on the generative power of individuals in the world that adhere to it. What I mean by that is like, what's more cataclysmic than gender reassignment surgery and you are now sterilized permanently, right? That's cataclysm. But on the other hand, the traditionalism being too rigid and too unchanging is itself also a form of stasis, which is also not fertile. So we do need like a balance. But I think
Yeah.
that I think Plato might have been onto something, that to have a, a traditional governance with an individuated progress is a healthy way to do it. I don't know if that's, the end all be all, but maybe that's the answer, or it's a good direction to look. I'm not sure. To circle back around to where we started, right?
Yes, and it all comes back to balance, harmony, and coherence, and starting from ourselves. So I think that's probably a good place to sort of start winding it up. And unless there was anything in particular that you wanted to add. Oh, sorry, the one thing, of course, is where people can find you, importantly.
Yeah, my website is innerversepodcast.com, and all the content that I create will be available there, as well as the booking with me for one-on-one sessions, whether it's a tuning or oracle card counseling, as I call it. Other than that, the best ways to support the show would be through Patreon or Substack. I've also got a YouTube channel membership, but I think Substack is the best, and I have plans to really expand what I'm offering on Patreon and Substack going forward, but I like the functionality of Substack best.
Yes, I'll put links. I've got links to your website, Substack, and Patreon. So I'll put those in the show notes. So other than that, do you have any kind of last thoughts to share with people before we wrap this up?
Just gratitude for people sticking it out for the whole show, and for you for having me on, and I really enjoyed the flow state that we got into. What I appreciate most about this is similar to the intuitive process of tuning, honestly, is every time I have one of these conversations, there's stuff that comes out in the moment as I'm just kind of like shooting from the hip that I've never thought before, right? And I think that's the benefit of these type of sit downs, especially in a very fast paced world where it's rare that you would sit and talk to anybody for a couple hours. Is I got to, in a few areas of this conversation, I got to a deeper bottom of what I think and what I know about some of these subjects than I've ever got to before, right? It might sound like I'm just saying stuff that I've deeply considered, but quite a bit of it is like on the fly synthesis. But that I can carry forward, and next time go further, build better and deeper. So I appreciate the opportunity to have this on the fly synthesis, because some of it I think was quite profound. Some of the macrocosm, microcosm parallels of this balance dynamic applied to society and to the individual were very, very interesting to explore. So appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you for sharing. And again, it shows how deep and broad and wide your knowledge base is, and how much research you've done over the years, that you're able to bring these points together and synthesize them. So thank you ever so much, Chance. Appreciate your joining me and sharing your wisdom. And yeah, maybe we'll have a part two at some point and dive further into these topics, other topics. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.